They had already declared the torpedo a failure. July 1943. The Pacific is black and breathless under a moonless sky. At periscope depth, an American submarine holds steady, electric motors humming low, crew frozen in disciplined silence. Through the lens, a Japanese cruiser cuts across the horizon, steel hull slicing phosphorescent water, escorts weaving in a tight defensive screen. The firing solution is clean. Angle on the bow, perfect. Range inside 1,500 yards. It is the kind of shot submarine captains dream about. Fire 1, Fire 2, Fire 3, Fire 4. 4 Mark 14 torpedoes surge from their tubes, propellers biting hard, leaving thin silver wakes across the dark sea. In the control room, men count seconds under their breath. Impact should come at 46 knots. Fast, lethal, decisive. 1. My note passes. Then 2. A lookout whispers, "Hit! Direct hit!" Through the periscope, the captain sees it clearly. A torpedo slams into the cruiser's hull at a clean 90-degree angle. A second follows, square amidships. But instead of a flash, instead of a column of flame splitting the night, there is only a dull metallic shudder. No detonation, no fireball. The cruiser continues forward, undamaged, searchlights snapping on as escorts turn aggressively toward the submarine's last known position. Another perfect attack, another humiliation. Across the Pacific since early 1942, this scene has repeated itself with cruel consistency. American submarines stalk convoys with textbook precision, calculate flawless firing solutions using the torpedo data computer, and deliver direct hits, only to watch their targets sail away. The Bureau of Ordnance in Washington insists the Mark 14 torpedo is the most advanced underwater weapon in the world, steam-driven, 3,000 pounds of American engineering capable of racing through the sea at 46 knots with a 680-pound warhead designed to snap a ship's keel in half. On paper, it is unstoppable. In combat, it is betraying them. Patrol reports stack up in Pearl Harbor and Fremantle. USS Swordfish, multiple hits, no explosions. USS Seawolf, torpedoes running erratically. USS Skipjack, 4 impacts on an aircraft carrier, 0 detonations. Submarine captains are quietly relieved for lack of aggression. Crews whisper that their weapons cannot be trusted. The silent service is risking its boats and men inside heavily defended shipping lanes, only to discover that courage means nothing if the torpedo refuses to function. Worse still, some torpedoes explode prematurely, detonating hundreds of yards from their targets and illuminating the submarine's position in a violent underwater flash. Japanese destroyers respond instantly, depth charges rolling off stern racks, shockwaves hammering steel hulls, lights flickering inside control rooms as bulkheads groan under pressure. American boats are being hunted because their own weapons give them away. The Pacific strategy depends on submarines. Japan is an island empire starving for oil, steel, rubber and food. Tankers from Borneo, freighters from Southeast Asia, troop transports reinforcing distant garrisons, all must cross vast stretches of open ocean. If American submarines can sever those arteries, Japan's war machine collapses. But through 1942 and into 1943, the numbers tell a darker story. Hundreds of torpedoes fired, confirmed sinkings far lower than claimed. A failure rate whispered among captains, 60%, maybe higher. Inside Washington's polished offices, admirals in pressed uniforms reject the accusations. The Mark 14 has been tested. Laboratory conditions prove its reliability. The magnetic exploder is revolutionary, designed to censor ship's magnetic field and detonate beneath the keel, breaking its back in two. The contact pistol is robust. The depth mechanism is precise. The problem, they insist, is operator error. But somewhere in the Pacific, beneath thousands of tons of seawater, American submariners know the truth is different. They have watched torpedoes strike hulls like thrown spears and bounce uselessly away. They have listened to the hollow clang of steel on steel instead of the roar of detonation. They have endured the humiliation of enemy crews standing on deck, waving mockingly at a submarine that cannot hurt them. Morale begins to erode. Confidence, the lifeblood of submarine warfare, fades. A captain must believe that when he commits to an attack inside 1,000 yards of an enemy cruiser, when destroyers sweep above him and sonar pings hammer his hull, the torpedoes in his tubes will do their job. Without that belief, every approach becomes hesitation, and hesitation kills. By mid-1943, one thing is undeniable. The Mark 14 torpedo, declared flawless by its designers, is failing in combat at catastrophic rates. Perfect. Shots are producing silence. Direct hits are producing nothing. The Admirals call it a dud. But somewhere in the Pacific command structure, a senior officer is studying the same reports, and he is beginning to suspect that the weapon itself, not the men firing it, is broken. If he is wrong, his career will end in disgrace. If he is right, the Pacific War is about to change. The sabotage wasn't coming from Tokyo. It was coming from inside the torpedo. By early 1942, the Silent Service had already begun its hunt, steel predators slipping beneath the Pacific, stalking the shipping lanes that kept Japan's empire alive. American submarines were everywhere, off the Philippines, the South China Sea, the Dutch East Indies. Their mission was simple in concept, brutal in execution, strangle Japan's logistics until its war machine suffocated. Every submarine carried the Navy's pride, the Mark 14 torpedo, steam-driven, fast, long-range, equipped with both a contact exploder and the revolutionary Mark 6 magnetic detonator, a device designed to sense a ship's magnetic field and detonate beneath the keel where armor was weakest. On paper, it was engineering brilliance. A single detonation under the hull could snap a freighter in half, but the war beneath the waves was exposing a darker reality. January 1942, USS Swordfish stalks a Japanese convoy at night. The captain executes a textbook approach, slipping through the escort screen undetected. 13 torpedoes fired in sequence. The crew listens, counts, waits. Nothing, not a single explosion. Weeks later, USS Seawolf attacks another convoy. 8 torpedoes launched. Again, silence, no fireballs. No sinking ships. Only Japanese destroyers turning toward the submarine's position as sonar contacts bloom across the water. Then comes USS Skipjack, inside 800 yards of an enemy aircraft carrier, point-blank range in submarine warfare. 4 torpedoes fired. Through the periscope, officers watch the wakes run straight and true. All 4 slam into the carrier's hull. 4 direct hits. 0 detonations. The carrier sails on. Patrol reports begin flooding Pearl Harbor, and they all tell the same story. Torpedoes running too deep. Torpedoes exploding prematurely. Torpedoes striking hulls and failing to detonate. Some even circle back in dangerous, circular runs, threatening the submarines that fired them. For submarine crews, the psychological toll is crushing. They are risking everything, penetrating convoy screens, evading destroyers, holding their boats steady for perfect firing solutions, only to discover their weapons are unreliable at the moment of truth. Inside cramped torpedo rooms, sailors begin referring to the Mark 14 with dark humor, calling it the Navy's most expensive hammer, because it hits, but it doesn't kill. Strategically, the consequences are catastrophic. Japan's war economy depends on maritime supply. Oil from Borneo fuels 0 fighters and battleships. Rubber and tin from Southeast Asia sustain industry. Food shipments keep both civilians and frontline troops alive. Every tanker sunk, every freighter destroyed, tightens the noose around Japan's ability to wage war, but the noose isn't tightening, it's slipping. Through 1942, American submarines fire over 1,000 torpedoes. Sinkings are claimed, but post-war analysis will reveal the truth. Barely a fraction of those ships actually went down. Many escaped damaged, many escaped untouched, and every failed attack carries lethal consequences. When a torpedo detonates prematurely, it creates a violent underwater flash visible for miles, instantly exposing the submarine's position. Japanese escorts react with ruthless efficiency. Depth charges cascade into the sea, detonating in concussive chains that slam into submarine hulls like sledgehammers. Other boats remain in patrol zones longer than planned, desperate to confirm kills that never happen, increasing the risk of detection. Some never return, yet inside Washington, the Bureau of Ordnance refuses to accept the mounting evidence. The Mark 14, they insist, has passed all tests. Laboratory data proves its reliability. The magnetic exploder is cutting-edge technology. The contact pistol is sound. Any failures must be due to poor shooting, improper maintenance, or submarine crew error. In other words, blame the men risking their lives, not the weapon they depend on. Submarine commanders grow furious. After one patrol plagued by duds, Commander Dudley Mush Morton radios Pearl Harbor with blunt clarity. "We need a new fish, and we need it now." The message is logged and ignored. As 1943 approaches, the scale of the invisible sabotage becomes undeniable. Submarines are in position. Firing solutions are accurate. Courage is not lacking, but the weapon meant to cripple Japan's supply lines is quietly crippling America's submarine campaign instead. Convoys continue moving. Tankers continue fueling fleets. Reinforcements continue reaching contested islands. The Pacific strategy is bleeding momentum. Not because submariners cannot fight, but because the torpedo designed to win the underwater war is betraying them. Shot after shot. And somewhere in the command structure, one admiral is beginning to see the pattern forming beneath the chaos. 3 separate failures, 3 mechanical flaws, each one deadly, and proving them will mean defying the very institution that built the weapon. They told him the weapon was flawless. They told him the men were the problem. Rear Admiral Charles Lockwood Jr. had spent his life around submarines, commanding them, training their crews, studying their tactics. He understood the psychology of undersea warfare better than most men alive. A submarine captain could not hesitate. He could not doubt. Every attack demanded absolute trust in his crew, his boat, and most critically, his torpedoes. By May 1942, when Lockwood took command of Submarines Southwest Pacific in Fremantle, Australia, that trust was collapsing. Patrol reports arrived. Daily, thick folders stamped confidential, each one describing the same impossible outcomes: perfect firing angles, direct hits observed, no explosions, tankers escaping, cargo ships limping away, escorts counter-attacking because submarines were forced to remain exposed longer than planned. Lockwood read every line. He noticed patterns others ignored. USS Pompano fired 9 torpedoes at a tanker. 9 impacts, no sinking. USS Permit launched 10 torpedoes at a stationary cargo ship, multiple hits, 0 detonations. USS Seawolf struck a factory ship repeatedly. The target survived. These weren't reckless commanders taking poor shots. These were disciplined, textbook attacks executed by some of the Navy's best. The conclusions forming in Lockwood's mind were dangerous. If the reports were accurate, then the Mark 14 torpedo, the Navy's most advanced underwater weapon, was failing at a systemic level. When he requested permission to investigate, the Bureau of Ordnance shut him down immediately. The torpedo works fine. The phrase echoed through official correspondence like doctrine. Any suggestion otherwise was treated as insubordination. The Bureau had designed the weapon, tested it, certified it. Failures in combat could only mean poor training or faulty maintenance. But Lockwood trusted the men in the field more than the engineers in Washington. He decided to prove it. June 1942. Without authorization, without informing the Bureau, Lockwood orders the first live field tests. Real torpedoes, real warheads, real conditions. The testing site is crude. Harbour nets strung offshore near Albany, Australia. Submarines fire torpedoes set to specific depths, while crews measure their actual running depth using improvised gauges. The results are immediate and damning. Every torpedo runs deeper than its setting, 10 feet deeper. A torpedo programmed to run at 10 feet is travelling at 20, sliding harmlessly beneath enemy hulls instead of striking them. It explains everything. Perfect firing solutions producing misses, torpedoes passing under ships without detonating. Lockwood sends the data to Washington. The Bureau's response is cold dismissal. Your testing methodology is flawed. The torpedo performs to specification. They refuse to even review the evidence. For Lockwood, the denial confirms something worse than mechanical failure: institutional arrogance. The men designing the weapon have more faith in laboratory theory than in battlefield reality. By early 1943, Lockwood's authority expands. He is transferred to Pearl Harbor and placed in command of Submarine's Pacific Fleet, now overseeing the entire undersea war against Japan. With that authority comes opportunity and risk. The Mark 14's magnetic exploder remains highly classified. Submarine crews are not even permitted to examine it. Tampering with torpedo mechanisms without Bureau authorization is a court-martial offense. Lockwood orders comprehensive testing anyway. At Kahulawe in the Hawaiian chain, a barren island rising from the Pacific, submarines fire torpedoes toward nets strung against cliff faces. Warheads live, detonators active, impact angles controlled. Again, the data is undeniable. Depth error confirmed. Then comes the second failure. Magnetic exploders, designed to detonate beneath a ship's keel, are triggering prematurely or not at all. Some torpedoes explode far from their targets. Others pass directly beneath hulls without firing. The revolutionary technology meant to guarantee destruction is introducing chaos instead. Lockwood makes a decisive call. Deactivate all magnetic exploders fleet-wide. Use contact mode only. It is an unauthorized order, a direct challenge to the Bureau's design authority. But submarine captains comply immediately. They trust Lockwood because he listens, because he believes their reports when others dismiss them. Yet even with corrected depth settings and disabled magnetic detonators, failures continue. Torpedoes strike hulls and still refuse to explode, which means the problem runs deeper. To prove it, Lockwood authorizes the most dangerous test yet, firing live torpedoes directly into solid cliff faces at full speed. If the contact exploder works, the warhead should detonate instantly on impact. The torpedoes slam into rock, warheads crumple, firing pins bend, no explosions. The discovery is staggering. At perfect 90-degree impact angles, the most ideal. Shot in submarine warfare, the force of impact crushes the firing pin before it can trigger the detonator. A flawless hit guarantees failure. 3 flaws: depth error, magnetic malfunction, contact pistol collapse. Together they have turned America's most advanced torpedo into a liability. Proving it has required Lockwood to violate classified weapons protocols, conduct unauthorized live fire testing, and directly challenge the Bureau of Ordnance. If Washington chooses to make an example of him, his career ends. But if he does nothing, submariners will keep dying while their torpedoes fail. So Lockwood compiles the evidence: photographs of bent firing pins, depth charts, patrol statistics, and prepares to confront the institution that built the weapon. Because now he isn't investigating a theory, he's exposing the Navy's most expensive wartime failure. By the time the evidence reached Washington, the damage was already done. Folders thick with patrol reports, photographs of torpedo impacts that never detonated, depth charts, fragments of shattered exploders recovered from cliff face tests in Hawaii. Rear Admiral Charles Lockwood laid them across the conference table like battlefield casualties. Across from him sat the men who had designed the Mark 14 engineers, bureau chiefs. Uniforms pressed, faces tight with institutional pride. They did not see a broken weapon. They saw an attack on their credibility. "You conducted unauthorized testing," one of them snapped. "You tampered with classified ordnance." Lockwood didn't flinch. "I tested weapons that are getting submariners killed." The room erupted. Accusations, procedural violations, security breaches. The Mark VI magnetic exploder was among the Navy's most guarded secrets. Field testing it without authorization was grounds for court-martial. Modifying torpedo settings fleet-wide without bureau approval bordered on insubordination. But Lockwood had brought numbers. Cold, undeniable. Over 700 torpedoes fired in recent patrol cycles. More than half failed to detonate properly. Direct hits recorded. Targets surviving. Submarines exposed because attacks required repeated firing solutions. "This isn't operator error," he said calmly. "This is systemic mechanical failure." Silence followed. Not agreement, but the weight of data that could no longer be ignored. The confrontation might have ended there, buried in committees, delayed by bureaucracy, if not for timing. The Pacific War was entering a decisive phase. Major amphibious offensives were approaching: Tarawa, Kwajalein, the Central Pacific Drive. Submarines were expected to sever Japan's supply arteries ahead of these invasions. They could not do that with defective torpedoes. When Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz entered the discussion, the tone changed instantly. He studied the photographs. Bent firing pins, crushed detonators, depth deviation charts. "How long to fix it?" he asked. Bureau engineers hesitated. A full redesign could take months. Retooling factories, recalling inventory, reissuing components, wartime production lines would slow. Too long. Nimitz made the decision that would shift the underwater war. Implement an interim solution immediately. Lockwood now had authorization. Limited, but decisive. He didn't need perfection. He needed reliability. Back in Pearl Harbor, submarine base workshops transformed into emergency engineering labs. Ordnance crews worked around the clock, disassembling Mark 14 exploders. The fragile firing pins, previously too light to withstand perpendicular impact, were replaced with heavier steel variants. Springs were reinforced. Trigger mechanisms recalibrated to survive the violent deceleration of a direct hit. Each modified exploder was hand-tested, bench-fired, inspected, reassembled. There was no margin for failure. Lockwood knew that one more patrol filled with duds would destroy the remaining confidence of the silent service. By October 1943, the modified torpedoes began reaching frontline submarines. No speeches, no announcements, just new detonators loaded quietly into forward tubes. The first real test came not in a laboratory, but in combat. Night surface attack, black Pacific water, a Japanese convoy silhouetted against the horizon. A cruiser at the center of the formation, heavily armored, escorts sweeping aggressively. An American submarine closed the distance on the surface, using speed instead of stealth. Radar tracking, fire control solutions calculated in minutes. The captain trusted the new modifications, trusted Lockwood's gamble, but there was no certainty until steel met steel. Fire. A full spread left the tubes, torpedoes racing low and fast beneath the waves. Seconds stretched into eternity inside the control room. Then the ocean erupted. The first detonation struck beneath the cruiser's forward magazine, a violent underwater blast that lifted thousands of tons of steel. The second followed midships, ripping through fuel bunkers. The third hit aft, detonating ammunition stores. The effect was catastrophic. Flame tore upward through superstructure decks. The bow heaved violently, structural integrity collapsing under the triple shockwave. Witnesses aboard escort destroyers later reported the sight in stunned disbelief. The cruiser split open bow to stern, her keel broken, hull plates peeling. Apart as fire poured from the wound like a volcanic eruption. Within minutes, she was dead in the water. Within 10, she was sinking. Inside the submarine, there was no cheering, only stunned silence. After nearly 2 years of doubt, humiliation, and mechanical betrayal, The torpedoes had finally worked exactly as designed. Lockwood's illegal tests, his defiance of Bureau authority, his rushed battlefield modifications, all vindicated in one violent eruption of fire and steel. But that single sinking was only the beginning. Because now the Silent Service finally possessed a weapon worthy of the men who fired it, and the Pacific shipping lanes were about to become killing grounds. By late 1943, the transformation was unmistakable. For nearly 2 years, American submarines had hunted like predators with blunted teeth, stalking convoys, risking depth charge barrages, firing perfect spreads, only to watch targets limp away. Now, with corrected depth settings, magnetic exploders disabled and reinforced contact pistols installed, the Silent Service finally possessed a torpedo that functioned the way its designers had always promised, and the Pacific Ocean began to burn. Convoy routes that once felt untouchable became graveyards. Oil tankers moving north from Borneo, lifeblood of Japan's fleet, started vanishing at a pace Japanese logistics officers could barely comprehend. Cargo ships carrying ammunition, aviation fuel, food and steel disappeared beneath black waves before reaching island garrisons. The change wasn't gradual, it was violent. USS Drum tore into supply lines off Formosa, sinking multiple freighters. In a single patrol, USS Buffin shredded a convoy near the Philippines, torpedoes striking from multiple angles, detonations ripping hulls apart in minutes. Patrol reports that once described dud hits now detailed catastrophic keel breaks, secondary explosions, ships sinking bow first in under 10 minutes. The ratio told the story best. Before Lockwood's fixes, submarines averaged nearly a dozen torpedoes per confirmed sinking. After the modifications, it dropped to 3, sometimes fewer. Success rates surged toward 80 to 90%. Confidence surged with it. Submarine captains began taking bolder risks. Night surface attacks, once considered reckless, became devastatingly effective. Boats would charge directly into convoy formations on the surface, using darkness and radar to fire spreads at multiple targets before escorts could react. It required nerve bordering on insanity, but it also required absolute trust in torpedoes that would now detonate on impact. One commander embodied that lethal confidence more than any other, Commander Richard O'Kane aboard USS Tang. Between early 1944 and late that year, Tang became a phantom executioner in Japanese shipping lanes. O'Kane specialized in close-range attacks, sometimes firing from under 1,000 yards, ensuring maximum hit probability. With functioning torpedoes, the results were devastating. Cargo ships exploded internally, fuel igniting in towering fireballs. Destroyers attempting counterattacks found themselves struck mid-maneuver. Convoys scattered in panic as multiple vessels detonated almost simultaneously. On one patrol alone, Tang sank or damaged more than a dozen ships, over 100,000 tons of Japanese logistics erased from the war effort. Japanese convoy commanders began reporting a terrifying new reality. American torpedoes could no longer be evaded. Shallow shots, deep shots, bow impacts, stern strikes, all detonated reliably. Evasion tactics that once worked were now meaningless. By mid-1944, Japan's merchant marine was collapsing. Oil imports dropped catastrophically. Warships were forced to ration fuel. Aircraft training hours were slashed, island garrisons starved as resupply convoys failed to arrive. Entire reinforcement divisions never reached their destinations because troop transports were sent to the bottom en route. Numbers reflected strategic strangulation, 42, hundreds of sinkings, but limited strategic effect. 43, shipping losses doubled as torpedo fixes took hold. 44. Over 600 Japanese ships sunk in a single year. The Silent Service, once dismissed as underperforming, was now responsible for destroying more than half of Japan's merchant fleet, but victory did not come without cost. October 1944, USS Tang, on her fifth patrol in the Formosa Strait, launched one of the most devastating submarine attacks in naval history. Over hours of combat, O'Kane's crew fired nearly their entire torpedo load, sinking multiple ships in a single convoy engagement. Then came tragedy. The final torpedo malfunctioned, a rare circular run. It curved back toward Tang before evasive maneuvers could clear the danger zone. The weapon struck the submarine's stern and detonated, sinking her in seconds. 78 crewmen were lost, even in that grim moment. The cruel irony remained. The torpedo detonated exactly as designed. O'Kane survived, later receiving the Medal of Honor for his combat record. By war's end, American submarines had sunk over 5 million tons of Japanese shipping, tankers, freighters, transports, crippling the Empire's ability to fight. Historians would later conclude that submarine warfare shortened the Pacific War by years, and at the center of that transformation stood one admiral who refused to accept comfortable lies. Charles Lockwood never sought public glory. He credited submarine crews for the victories, but among the silent service, his reputation was unshakable. The commander who listened when others dismissed them, who risked his career to fix the weapon they depended on, who turned humiliation into dominance. After the war, the Navy institutionalized the lessons born from the Mark 14 scandal. Field testing became mandatory. Combat feedback could no longer be ignored. The phrase, "the torpedo works fine," entered military doctrine as a warning against bureaucratic arrogance, because the legacy of the crisis wasn't just technological. It was leadership. Listen to the men in the fight, test what you trust, and when lives depend on the truth, challenge authority if you must. In the end, the torpedo, once mocked as a dud, didn't just sink ships. It helped sink an empire.